"Mr. Pierce, your jet is ready." Alexander Pierce stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, gazing at the San Francisco skyline he'd helped reshape with his tech empire. At 35, he was about to add another achievement to his already impressive list: a perfect wedding to the perfect woman. Yet his thumb hovered over a name in his phone that threatened to unravel it all: Sarah Mitchell. The invitation had been sent on impulse 3 months ago, after a late night reviewing old photos while finalizing the guest list. Victoria, his fiancée, had called him crazy. Maybe she was right, but something about starting this new chapter without closing the old one felt incomplete. The arrangements at the Maldives resort are confirmed, so his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. The entire island has been reserved for the weekend. The glass pavilion construction is ahead of schedule. Alex pocketed his phone without sending the message he'd drafted and deleted a dozen times. Through the windows of his private jet, he watched San Francisco disappear beneath the clouds. The numbers were staggering: 500 guests, a private island, celebrity performers, and a wedding venue that looked like it had emerged from the ocean itself, a crystalline pavilion that would capture the sunset over the Indian Ocean. Money hadn't been a consideration, not since TechFuture, his AI company, had revolutionized quantum computing. The media called him the boy wonder of Silicon Valley, the billionaire who'd cracked the code before 30. They loved the story: the scholarship kid who'd built an empire from his dorm room. What they didn't know was that he hadn't been alone in that dorm room. The first response to the wedding invitations arrived within hours of landing in the Maldives. Alex's phone buzzed as he inspected the venue, a masterpiece of glass and steel rising from the pristine beach like a diamond catching the sun. "I'll be there. Sarah." 2 simple words that sent his carefully ordered world tilting on its axis. Victoria appeared at his side, radiant in resort wear, her society polish undimmed by the tropical heat. "Darling, is everything all right? You look pale." Alex forced a smile, slipping the phone into his pocket. "Just wedding jitters," he lied, watching workers arrange white orchids worth more than his first car. But his mind was 7 years in the past, in a small campus apartment, where a different future had once seemed possible. The hotel staff scurried around them, preparing for tomorrow's rehearsal dinner. Everything was perfect, controlled, planned. Yet as the sun set over the Indian Ocean, Alexander Pierce, the man who'd built his fortune on predicting the future, felt his certainties beginning to crack. Alex's dreams that night were filled with memories he'd spent years trying to forget. Stanford University, 2016. The computer science lab hummed with the sound of dozens of computers running complex algorithms. But Alex only heard Sarah's laugh as she perched on the desk beside him, reading his code over his shoulder. "You're going to burn out if you don't take a break," she said, running her fingers through his disheveled hair. Her own textbook's molecular biology and biochemistry lay forgotten nearby. "Just one more iteration," he mumbled, fingers flying across the keyboard. "This could change everything, Sarah. Quantum computing, but with a biological interface. No one's ever done it before." Sarah smiled, the kind of smile that had made him fall for her in their freshman year: brilliant, understanding, and just a little sad. "No one's done a lot of things you're going to do, Alex Pierce." They'd met in the financial aid office, both scholarship students trying to navigate the world of privilege that was Stanford. Sarah, with her second-hand textbooks and 3 part-time jobs, had the same hungry look in her eyes that Alex recognized from his own reflection. But while he hungered for success, she hungered for discovery, the pure joy of understanding how things worked. Their love had grown in stolen moments: midnight coffee runs, shared dreams whispered in the library stacks, passionate debates about whether technology or medicine would save the world. Sarah's tiny off-campus apartment became their sanctuary, its walls covered with her biology sketches and his algorithm flowcharts. "We'll change the world together," they'd promise each other, young and certain in the way only college students could be. "You'll cure diseases. I'll build the computers to help you do it faster." The memory shifted to their last night together. Spring 2017. The acceptance letter from the Silicon Valley Accelerator program lay between them like a wall. "They're offering me everything, Sarah. Full funding, mentorship, connections. This is my chance." "Our chance," Sarah corrected quietly. "We talked about starting the company together. After graduation, after my research fellowship." But Alex was already shaking his head. "I can't wait. They want me to start immediately. Drop out, Move to Silicon Valley. This is the moment I can feel it. And Sarah's voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she folded them in her lap. What about our plans? Come with me, he said, but they both knew it was impossible. Her fellowship was her own dream, her chance to pursue the medical research she'd fought so hard for. I love you, she said simply, but I won't be the one who holds you back, and I won't let you hold me back either. The next morning he'd left for Silicon Valley. No dramatic goodbye, no promises to stay in touch. Just a clean break, the kind successful people were supposed to make. The memory dissolved into another, his first meeting with Victoria Hamilton Shaw, 3 years ago. She'd been everything Sarah wasn't: polished, connected, born into the world he'd fought so hard to join. The daughter of a banking dynasty, Victoria understood the language of power and wealth, as if it were her mother tongue. Darling, you simply must meet the ambassador, she'd say, steering him through glittering ballrooms with practiced ease. And the Foundation's annual gala needs a keynote speaker, someone young, visionary. Victoria fit perfectly into the life he'd built. She knew which wines to order, which causes to support, which rumors to cultivate in the press. Their courtship had been a masterclass in social choreography, each step calculated to enhance both their brands. We'll be the ultimate power couple, Victoria had said when he proposed, her smile dazzling under the restaurant's crystal chandeliers. The ring on her finger cost more than Sarah's entire college tuition. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between board meetings and charity galas, Alex found himself remembering a different smile, a different dream. He'd Googled Sarah once, 3 years after their breakup. She'd completed her fellowship, published promising research in cellular biology. The photo showed her in a lab coat, still with that passionate gleam in her eyes. He'd closed the browser before reading more. Now, on the eve of his wedding, those memories refused to stay buried. Victoria slept peacefully beside him in their luxury villa, her face serene with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned their place in the world. But Alex lay awake, wondering if somewhere in that same dawn broke over the Maldives in a symphony of rose and gold, finding an army of workers already transforming the beach into a billionaire's vision of paradise. Alex watched from his suite's balcony as crystal chandeliers were hoisted into place above the shoreline, catching the morning light like suspended stars. The flowers from Amsterdam have arrived, his wedding coordinator announced, tablet in hand. The ice sculptures are being positioned, and the Michelin-starred chef is preparing to do the final taste test. Time to get ready, Mr. Pierce. Inside his suite, an entire team waited to transform him into the perfect groom. As his barber worked, Alex's phone buzzed with a message that made his heart stop. Just landed. Sarah. The straight razor slipped, nicking his jaw. A thin line of red appeared in the mirror, and suddenly Alex couldn't breathe. She was here, actually here. Darling, Victoria's voice floated through the door. The photographers want to know if we're still doing the sunset drone shoot. Whatever you think is best, he called back, his voice surprisingly steady despite the chaos in his mind. The door opened, and Victoria swept in, already half transformed into a bride. Her wedding dress, a custom creation that had required 3 trips to Paris, rustled like expensive promises. But her eyes narrowed at his expression. You're thinking about her, aren't you? The accusation hung in the air between them. I saw the guest list confirmation. She actually accepted. Alex met her gaze in the mirror. She's part of my past, Victoria, nothing more. Then why invite her at all? Victoria dismissed the beauty team with a practiced wave. Once they were alone, her perfect poise cracked slightly. Do you know what people will say? The scandal blogs are already speculating. Billionaire invites college sweetheart to wedding. It's tacky, Alex. It's closure, he corrected, but even to his own ears, the words sounded hollow. Outside, a string quartet began rehearsing. The melody drifted up, mixing with the sound of waves and distant helicopter rotors as more guests arrived. This was meant to be the society event of the year, carefully orchestrated, extensively photographed, and talked about for seasons to come. I need to know, Victoria said quietly, her manicured fingers gripping the back of his chair. Is there something you're not telling me? About her? About why she disappeared so suddenly back then? Alex's chest tightened. The memory of Sarah's last email, the one he'd never opened, weighed on him like lead. He'd archived it, telling himself it was better not to know, better to move forward. Now, 7 years later, that decision felt like a mistake he couldn't undo. Nothing, he lied, forcing a smile. Ancient history. Victoria studied him for a long moment, then nodded sharply. Her armor slid back into place. Well then, let's give them the perfect wedding they're expecting. She paused at the door. And Alex, remember who stood by you while you built your empire? Who understands the world you belong in now? After she left, Alex stood at the window watching the final preparations. The glass pavilion gleamed like a diamond on the beach, surrounded by thousands of white orchids. Ice sculptures caught the light, champagne fountains burbled, and a small fleet of yachts bobbed in the distance, carrying the elite of Silicon Valley and Wall Street. Everything was perfect. Everything was wrong. His phone buzzed again. A picture message this time from Sarah. His fingers trembled as he opened it, expecting perhaps a casual selfie or a view of the island. Instead, he saw a little boy, about 7 years old, sleeping on an airport chair. The child's face hit him like a physical blow, the same jaw, the same slight furrow between the brows that he saw in every childhood photo of himself. The message below the photo was simple: we need to talk. The room spun. Outside, the wedding march began to play. Night, Sarah was looking at her invitation, remembering too. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the beach as guests filtered into their seats. Alex stood at the altar, his bow tie suddenly too tight, watching the resort's entrance with an intensity that didn't go unnoticed by the wedding party. Victoria's mother was already whispering behind her hand to the society photographers, likely spinning the tension as pre-wedding jitters. But then he saw her. Sarah Mitchell stepped onto the beach path, looking both familiar and strange. Her chocolate brown hair caught the sunlight, falling in natural waves around her shoulders, so different from the sleek updos surrounding him. She wore a simple blue dress that somehow made all the designer gowns around her look overdone. But it wasn't her appearance that caused the collective gasp from the assembled guests. It was the little boy holding her hand. The child couldn't have been more than 7, dressed in a miniature suit that might have been cute if it hadn't made Alex's blood run cold. The boy's face was like looking into a mirror of the past, the same determined jaw, the same slight cleft in his chin that had been passed down through 3 generations of Pierce men. Even the way he walked, slightly on his toes when nervous, was painfully familiar. "Oh my God," Victoria's sister breathed from her place in the bridesmaid line. "Is that?" The whispers spread like wildfire through the crowd. Phones emerged from designer clutches, social media algorithms undoubtedly lighting up with what promised to be the scandal of the year. Alex couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as Sarah and the boy made their way down the aisle of white chairs. The boy looked up, meeting Alex's gaze with eyes that matched his own, a distinctive grey that his mother used to call storm cloud silver. There was curiosity in that look, and something else: recognition. Had Sarah shown him photos? Told him stories? Victoria appeared at Alex's side, her wedding dress rustling like angry whispers. "What is the meaning of this?" she hissed through her perfect smile. Years of social training keeping her voice low despite the fury in her eyes. But Alex couldn't answer. His focus was locked on the small family making their way forward. Sarah's chin was held high, though he could see the slight tremor in her hand as she guided the boy past the murmuring crowds. She looked exactly like he remembered, and completely different. There was a new strength in her bearing, a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with money or status. "James," he heard her say softly to the boy, "would you like to say hello?" James. His son's name was James. The boy stepped forward, unconsciously mimicking Alex's own stance, hands in pockets, shoulders slightly back. "Hello, Mr. Pierce," he said, his voice clear and steady despite the hundreds of eyes fixed upon him. "Mum says you're my father." The words hung in the air like summer lightning. Someone in the crowd dropped a champagne glass, the crystal shattering on the wooden walkway. Victoria's grip on Alex's arm turned painful. Sarah finally spoke, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. "I'm sorry to do this here," she said, looking directly at Alex. "But after 7 years I thought he deserved to know. And you deserve to know too." Alex stared at the child, at James, seeing himself at that age. The same serious expression, the same way of holding himself slightly apart from a crowd. But there was something of Sarah there too, in the gentle curve of his smile, in the thoughtful way he observed everything around him. How Alex started, but the words stuck in his throat. Perhaps Sarah suggested quietly, we should talk somewhere private. But privacy was already impossible. The guests were on their feet now, phones recording every moment, society matrons clutching their pearls, tech billionaires exchanging knowing looks. And through it all, James stood there, looking up at his father with 7 years of questions in his eyes. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand released Alex's arm with deliberate slowness. The silence stretched across the beach like a rubber band about to snap. Then she stepped forward, her wedding dress whispering across the sand as she positioned herself between Alex and his unexpected guests. "How dare you," she said, her voice carrying just far enough to reach the closest rows of spectators. "How dare you come here with this performance?" Sarah met her gaze steadily. "This isn't a performance, Ms. Hamilton Shaw. This is reality." Reality. Victoria's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Reality is that if this child were really Alex's, we'd have heard about him years ago. Not at our wedding. Not in front of everyone." She turned to Alex, her voice softening artificially. "Darling, surely you see what this is. A desperate attempt to extort money, using a child as bait." Alex barely heard her. He was watching James, who had withdrawn slightly behind Sarah, his small face a mirror of confusion and hurt. The boy's hand went to his chin, the same unconscious gesture Alex made when uncomfortable, the same gesture his own father had made. "He has your father's eyes," Sarah said quietly, catching Alex's stare. "I saw a photo of him once, in your dorm room. The grey runs in your family, doesn't it?" The whispers around them grew louder. Alex could catch fragments. Spitting image. Must have known the timing fits. His tech empire had been built on pattern recognition, on seeing connections others missed. Now those same skills were betraying him, highlighting every similarity, every shared trait between himself and the boy who watched him with familiar storm cloud eyes. "I can prove it," Sarah continued, reaching into her purse. "I have medical records, birth certificate." "But stop." Alex's voice cracked on the word. "Just stop." Victoria seized his arm again. "We should call security. This is ridiculous." Let her speak. The words came out stronger this time. Alex stepped away from his fiancée, toward his son who straightened unconsciously, mirroring his posture. "Why now?" the question burst from him, years of buried emotions finally surfacing. "Why wait 7 years?" "Because 7 years ago, you made it very clear that nothing was more important than your success." Sarah's voice held no bitterness, only truth. "You were going to change the world, remember? No distractions, no compromises. I had a right to know." "Yes," Sarah agreed simply. "You did, just like James has a right to know his father." Victoria stepped between them again. "This is absurd. We have 200 guests waiting, a minister who looks exactly like him." An elderly woman in the front row stage whispered to her companion. "Look at the way they both stand. And that chin." The murmurs were growing, spreading through the crowd like ripples in a pond. Alex saw his board members exchanging glances, saw Victoria's family huddled in tense discussion. His carefully constructed world was unraveling thread by thread. James suddenly spoke up, his clear voice cutting through the adult tension. "I won my school's science fair," he said, looking directly at Alex. "I built a robot that can solve puzzles. Mom says that's what you do too, build smart machines." The simple pride in the boy's voice hit Alex like a physical blow. He saw himself at that age, desperate to prove himself, to make something of nothing. But James wasn't nothing. He was everything Alex had never known he was missing. Victoria's voice turned to ice. "Alex, the minister is waiting. Make your choice." But as Alex stood there, between the perfect future he'd planned and the past he'd never properly faced, he realized the choice had already been made. 7 years ago, in a small campus apartment, when he'd walked away from love in pursuit of success. Now success stood on one side, wearing a designer wedding dress and promising power, and love stood on the other, in the shape of a little boy with his eyes and his dreams. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the beach as Alex led Sarah and James to a private pavilion, away from the prying eyes and whispers. Victoria followed, her wedding dress gathering sand, her face a mask of controlled fury. I need to understand, Alex said, his voice hoarse. That last night, when I told you about Silicon Valley. Sarah's hand rested protectively on James's shoulder. I had just found out that morning, 2 pink lines on a drugstore test. I was going to tell you over dinner, but then you came in with the accelerator news, so excited about your future. She paused, swallowing hard. Your future. Not ours. You should have told me. Alex's words came out strangled, desperate. Should I? Sarah's eyes met his, still holding that same quiet strength he remembered. You were ready to leave everything behind. Your degree, our plans, me. Would knowing about a baby have changed anything? Or would it just have made you resent us both? The truth of her words hit him like physical pain. He remembered his mindset then, the burning ambition, the absolute certainty that nothing could stand in the way of his destiny. I sent you an email, Sarah continued softly, a week after you left, explaining everything. When you never responded, I had my answer. Alex felt the blood drain from his face. The email he'd never opened, convinced that clean breaks were better. 7 years of unread words that might have changed everything. This is all very touching, Victoria cut in, her voice sharp as a blade, but it doesn't change the fact that you chose this moment, this day, to drop your bomb. Was that calculated, Sarah, waiting until there were cameras and witnesses? James, who had been quietly observing the adults, suddenly spoke up. Mom didn't want to come. I asked her to. His grey eyes. Alex's eyes were serious. I saw your picture in a magazine. Mom keeps all the articles about your company, about the computers that help doctors. I wanted to meet you. Alex stared at his son, really seeing him now. The way he held himself, trying to be brave. The slight tremor in his hands that he tried to hide by clasping them behind his back. Another inherited gesture. The articles, he asked softly. Sarah nodded. He started collecting them himself. He's already building basic robots, teaching himself to code. I couldn't keep hiding the truth when he was following in your footsteps without even knowing it. Victoria's laugh was brittle. How convenient. A child genius, just like his supposed father. Did you coach him on what to say? That's enough. Alex's voice was quiet but firm. Look at him, Victoria. Really look. You've seen my childhood photos, you know. What I know is see. Victoria stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper, is that there are 200 guests out there, including half of Silicon Valley's elite. The press is watching. Your shareholders are watching. If you acknowledge this situation, everything changes. Your perfect image. Your company's reputation. My son, Alex interrupted, the word feeling both foreign and right on his tongue. Victoria's face hardened. Fine. Make your choice right now, Alex. Me and everything we've built, everything we're about to build together. Or them, she gestured dismissively towards Sarah and James. A ready-made family that appears out of nowhere with claims they can't prove. James flinched at her tone, and something in Alex snapped. He saw himself at that age lonely, determined, desperate to prove himself. But James wasn't alone. He had Sarah's strength, her kindness, everything Alex had walked away from in pursuit of his dreams. They're not claims, he said quietly. They're truth. My truth. A truth I should have known 7 years ago if I hadn't been too blind with ambition to see it. Victoria's eyes narrowed. So that's your choice? No, Alex said, looking at his son. That's my chance. Alex turned to face the waiting crowd, his decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. Victoria stood frozen beside him, her white dress now seeming more like armor than celebration. I need to address our guests, he said quietly. Alex, don't you dare, Victoria started, but he was already walking toward the gathered crowd, James's small hand finding its way into his. The gesture, so natural and yet so new, nearly undid him. 7 years of lost moments crashed over him, first steps, first words, first days of school. All the milestones he'd missed while chasing an empire. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice carried across the beach, steady despite the tremor in his heart. I've spent my life building systems that process information, that recognize patterns, that make connections. But today I failed to see the most important connection of all until it was standing right in front of me. He looked down at James, who stared back with unwavering trust. In that moment, Alex saw his future reorganizing itself, priorities shifting like tectonic plates. This wedding was meant to be about building the perfect future. But I realize now that perfection isn't about stock prices or social status. It's about authenticity. About acknowledging our past and embracing unexpected gifts. Victoria stepped forward, her face tight with fury. Think carefully about what you're doing, Alex. Everything we've built will still be there, he finished gently. But it won't be everything anymore, he turned back to the crowd. I apologize to all of you who traveled so far for a wedding. Instead, you're witnessing something else, a reunion, a recognition, a second chance I never knew I needed. Sarah moved closer, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Alex, you don't have to. Yes, I do, he squeezed James's hand. 7 years ago, I chose ambition over love. I thought success meant never looking back, never letting anything slow you down. I was wrong. The whispers in the crowd had changed now, turning from scandal to something softer. Alex saw understanding in some faces, recognition in others. How many of them had made similar choices? How many had regretted them? James, he knelt down to his son's level. I missed the beginning of your story. I can't change that. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of the next chapter. The boy's face lit up with a smile that was pure. Sarah, Mom says you build computers that help people. Could you teach me? I'd love to. Alex felt tears threatening. And maybe you could teach me too. About robots and science fairs and everything I should have known already. He stood, facing Victoria one last time. Her perfect composure had cracked, showing the fury beneath. You're throwing everything away, she hissed. For what? Some kid you just met? No, Alex said softly. I'm finally understanding what everything really means. He slipped the wedding ring from his pocket and placed it in her hand. I'm sorry, Victoria. You deserve someone who can give you their whole heart. Mine, it seems, has been divided for 7 years without me even knowing it. The gathered guests were standing now, watching the scene unfold with a mix of shock and something that looked surprisingly like approval. Alex saw his board members nodding thoughtfully, saw the press furiously taking notes. Tomorrow's headlines would be explosive, but for the first time in his career, he didn't care about the optics. Sarah stepped forward, her hand joining his on James's shoulder. Are you sure about this? She asked quietly. Your reputation, your image, were built on innovation, he finished. On taking risks. On recognizing opportunities. He looked at their son, seeing both their futures reflected in those grey eyes. This is the best opportunity I've ever been given, even if I'm 7 years late in taking it. As the sun set over the Indian Ocean, painting the sky in colors no algorithm could capture, Alex Pierce, the man who'd built his fortune on predicting the future, finally learned to embrace the beautiful uncertainty of love. 3 months later, the headlines had moved on to new scandals, but the lessons remained. Alex Pierce, the tech billionaire who chose family over a picture-perfect wedding, was spotted teaching robotics at a local science camp, his son by his side. The same determination that had built an empire now focused on building something far more precious, a relationship with the child he'd never known he had. Sarah and James moved into a house nearby, taking things one day at a time. Sometimes, late in the evening, the three of them could be seen in Alex's home lab, working on James's latest robot design or discussing new ways technology could help people. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that made all the difference. Life doesn't always give us the story we planned. Sometimes it gives us something better, a chance to rewrite our priorities, to recognize that true wealth isn't measured in stock prices or social status, but in the moments we share with those who matter most. Hey everyone, thanks for watching this incredible true story of love, redemption, and second chances. If you were moved by Alex, Sarah, and James's journey, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more amazing real-life stories that will touch your heart. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had a moment that completely changed your life's direction? Until next time, remember that it's never too late to choose what truly matters.